Welcome to MSUA's Game Changers Live, where we speak with satellite and mobile connectivity leaders about industry trends, new technologies, and share what you need to know about where the satellite industry is headed in the future. I'm Lisa Dreer, your host, and today our guest is Andy Musliner. He is the EVP and COO at Kythera Space Solutions. Welcome to the show, Andy.
Thanks very much, Lisa, for having me.
Absolutely. Maybe you can start by giving us just a little bit of background on yourself and Kythera Space Solutions.
Sure. I started off actually in the satellite communications industry way, a long time ago, doing software for analysis of satellite communications for NASA back in the 80s and 90s. So sort of early on in satellite communications. And then I left the satellite communications industry and had a lot of different forays into many other industries. And sort of if you sort of step back and say, what is Andy's career focused on? It's really around being at the center of a technology revolution. I like to be sort of in the middle of the whirlwind of a tornado of technology revolution where we need to drive adoption of that technology to change an industry, or for that matter, to change the world. So I was early on in e-commerce, at the middle of that, as an executive in one of the first end-to-end e-business solutions providers back when the internet was young, before Amazon was a household name. And then when everybody started moving to mobile in the early 2000s, I was one of the founding executives of a company called DMI, which today is one of the leading providers of enterprise mobile solutions, where you're putting apps on phones and you're putting apps on tablets and bringing them into enterprises and government. I had a stint doing advanced cybersecurity strategy to drive technology adoption of hardware-based security around the globe. Basically, I just like to be at the heart of a technology revolution to drive innovation. And so about 4 years ago, I actually met up with my old friends from the satellite communications industry and said, hey, what's going on? It's been a sleepy industry for a long time. And they said, well, things are about to change. There is a major revolution about to get underway as we move from fixed service satellite to software-defined satellites. And that's going to change everything. And we've got some really cool technology that we think can make a difference. And I said, wow, this seems like yet another tornado I'd like to be in the middle of. And so here we are 4 years later, and Kythera Space Solutions is the leading provider of software systems to manage and optimize next generation satellite payloads and SATCOM networks. So it's a really exciting time to be in this industry.
Wow. Amazing. What an amazing career, and really excited about what is happening with Kythera as well. In fact, I think you guys were recognized last year by MSUA with one of our Mobile Innovation Awards.
Yes, you were very kind. We were named, I believe it's the New Space Technology Innovation of the Year. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, congratulations on that. We're getting ready for another awards ceremony coming up here in March at the satellite event. So really excited about that. So we invited you here today to talk a little bit about your perspectives on where things are headed. And obviously, being someone that likes to be on kind of the cutting edge of what's happening, we're really looking forward to your insights here. Maybe you can talk a little bit about what you feel is the most important role that the satellite industry is going to play in the future of mobile connectivity.
So, I guess if you think about mobile connectivity, and when I think of mobile connectivity in this context, I don't think about just sort of handsets on phones. I think about airplanes and ships and things like that. Just to draw the distinction there from my old job. So the key there is the mobility, right? So, you don't really have necessarily access to a terrestrial network. And so satellite service really is the key to that mobile service. And satellite, if we can get satellite service right, satellite service is the key to ubiquity in terms of providing mobile connectivity. You're not going to get it any other way. So the job of the industry, the job of the satellite communications industry is really to drive down the cost sufficiently and drive up the flexibility and convenience so that it's really easy to have ubiquitous service that you can rely on in the same way that we all rely on our mobile phones today.
Yeah. So when you look at, I don't know, the coming 3 to 5 years, what do you think will be some of the biggest changes that we'll be seeing?
So the place that, for instance, Kythera plays is in recognizing the shift to this software-defined satellite model, where in the past you've had fixed service satellites that had a fixed number of beams that are basically shining down a whole bunch of power and capacity into a particular area. And now we're moving to a model where you've got these much more flexible satellites that can adapt on the fly and provide capacity where you need it, when you need it, for what you need it for. And so really, I think the biggest change is this move to a software-defined model, which provides you the ability to have dynamic on-demand service, bandwidth where you need it, when you need it, and that provides the flexibility you need to create that not only drives down the cost, but it also drives up the ability to have adoption wherever you want.
Right. So speaking of driving down costs, one of the things that is being talked about a lot in the industry is this idea of industry standards and moving away from proprietary solutions and systems. What's your perspective on this?
So standards are absolutely necessary if you're going to get to a place where you have interoperability. And sort of make no mistake, what's happening is we're moving to a place where there's a global, interoperable, dynamic satellite communications network. That's sort of the end game. And in order to have that, you've got to have interoperability. In order to have the interoperability, you've got to have some standards. So at Kythera, we're doing our part in driving standards that are enabling the ability to have connectivity and interoperability between the space network and the ground network, and be able to do have common approaches to command and control and telemetry information, so that you can have a way to integrate all these pieces together in a unified and dynamic way. When you move from sort of a fixed model where you're doing a lot of things on spreadsheets and on paper, and you need to have things now happen in real time, you really need to have basically a standard set of way to communicate.
Sure.
And just to sort of bring that up to sort of where we play in this, so Kythera's focus is on providing the software systems that manage and optimize these satellite communication networks. And so, our interest is in making sure that all of this can be interoperable and interconnected.
Sure. When you were kind of doing your introduction, you were talking a lot about how much the satellite industry is in the midst of some great shifts and changes. And we've seen a lot of new space and new companies entering this market. We've also seen some acquisitions and mergers. What do you see this, kind of this commercialization of space? What role do you see that playing in, I guess, the proliferation of satellite services for mobile applications?
Well, so, I was in the satellite communications industry, 35 years ago. And that's, it was largely government at that time. And, we had lots of really cool innovation, but it didn't go really past that. With the commercialization of this industry, you've got just a tremendous amount of innovation going on. You've got new terminals that can have multiple connections to multiple satellites simultaneously. You've got, got these new software-defined satellites that can then connect to these terminals, and then you can have flexibility and resiliency and all these fancy things that you never had before. And so what you get out of all of that is you get more options, you get a much lower cost, because the flexibility drives down cost. The number of new innovations are driving up the the technology sophistication, and then you also need, of course, the way to simplify it so that people can use it, because sophistication is hard to deal with. But that greater innovation gives you the ability to create the opportunity for ubiquity. And now you don't get the ubiquity really until you're able to scale. And so that's where the acquisitions come in, because the acquisitions enable you to scale the technology and actually build out the infrastructure and build out the interoperability across the world. So it's sort of all tied together, but what has to happen here is you got to have these great new innovations feed on themselves, drive technology adoption, scale, and then it in turn drives the lower cost, and off you go.
Yeah,
It sounds too
absolutely.
easy, but it's not really that easy.
Yeah, well, if it was easy, then would have been done already, right? So when you look at delivering commercial satellite services to the market today, what do you see as some of the biggest challenges to, bringing that to market in today's world?
So bringing it to market, I think, well, one of the reasons it has to come to market is in order to drive down the cost. So satellite service is more expensive than a terrestrial network. And if we can collectively as an industry drive that cost down so it's at least cost reasonable, then you have a greater opportunity to drive that ubiquity. So cost is something we got to work on. And again, that's something that we're focused on, because our whole business is around driving down the cost of the satellite service and driving up its optimized capability. Now, other also in terms of sort of barriers, there's a lot of effort right now, and you see it all over the place, where people are building new LEO constellations. You've got new MEO networks, you've got GEO. All of these things ultimately are being tied together. That is a pretty tall order to try to integrate. You talk about just one LEO constellation, that's a tall order in and of itself, but now you need to be able to integrate that with, say, your existing GEO legacy satellites. This is technology, for instance, that Kythera has to be able to tie these things together. So if you're on a mobile, you're flying in a plane and you need the service to connect you from one satellite to another satellite in a different orbit, we have technology to do that automatically on the fly without you ever having to worry about it. But that's next generation, latest and greatest type of stuff. That stuff has to happen in order for you to get that ubiquity. But tying it all together is a non-trivial task.
Right.
And
So when you think about actually the user perspective, and you think about some of the use cases that this technology is appropriate in supporting, what are the criteria that users of this technology should be looking at and really understanding?
So the user, ultimately, I think the user should be focused on availability and flexibility and price. If I'm a user of my cell phone, I don't care about things like what frequency am I on, what's my modulation scheme, where's the cell tower I'm connected to. I don't care about any of that. All I care about is that there's little bars that tells me that I have a signal, and that I can press a little button and I can draw up my apps. That's ideally where we want to be with satellite as well. So the user increasingly should be focused primarily on their business need, not on the specific technology, because the technology we should be able to make sort of go away from their perspective. It should be not something they worry about. But what has to happen behind the scenes is that the satellite operators need these new flexible satellites, these software-defined satellites, so that they can create this much more dynamic operation for their satellite network. And they need also the software behind it to run that network. That's the kind of stuff that Kythera provides. And once you tie all that together, then again, the user should be less worried about what's behind them. But if I'm a user today and I'm thinking about, say, who am I going to get as my provider 2 or 3 years from now, I'd be looking at who's adopting some of these new technologies, who's adopting dynamic networks, who's basically adopting dynamic SATCOM, and then do they have the infrastructure to support it? Because if they don't, if they're buying one of these fancy new satellites that has software-defined capabilities to define beams and reshape them and replace them and do dynamic channelization, that's not very useful if they don't have the software behind it to manage it. Sort of like if you were buying a cell phone, a cell phone today that's an iPhone or Android phone, and had all these cool apps on it, but behind the scenes there was a switchboard operator who was punching in things, putting things together. So, you don't want the switchboard operator in the background, making things happen for this fancy new satellite.
Right. So what is the best way for an end user to really, I guess, evaluate a service provider that they're considering working with and determine whether they are doing these things?
I think so. I guess I would be just sort of asking the questions about what's their roadmap. There's a lot happening right now. What is the roadmap for the satellites they're putting up and the infrastructure they're putting in place to be able to create a much more dynamic service that gives them bandwidth on demand, capacity where they need it, when they need it, follow me beams that are going to follow their mobile users across the Atlantic or wherever they're going. How are they going to enable that capability? That's really what they need to be thinking about, because it's not so much what's in place today, it's more about what's going to be in place a year from now, 3 years from now. That's going to make the big difference.
Yeah, absolutely. So are there other technologies that folks should be kind of looking at and getting smart on? And I know you kind of said, hey, they don't need to really know about that stuff. They just need to make sure that they're going to get what they need. But for those that are interested, what should they be looking at, and how should they go about, I guess, learning about those things?
Well, so again, I'm sort of focused in our little area here. It's sort of a big area in the sense that we're focused on driving, the adoption of dynamic SATCOM and next generation capabilities. Some of the things that are interesting to me are, these new terminals, as an example. So if I'm a mobile, if I'm somebody who's got, a mobile fleet of planes or ships or something, I'd be thinking about some of these mobile terminals that have the ability to connect to multiple satellites in multiple orbits that can, dynamically switch on the fly. All that stuff, again, requires some brain behind it. Again, we make the space brain that essentially ties all this together, but needs something to say, okay, when do I want to switch? Why do I want to switch? And, how does that happen? But if you can, start looking at some of these advanced technologies to enable the flexibility that you'll want and enable the resiliency that you want, then I think you're well positioned for that future.
Sure. Great. Well, Andy, I want to thank you so much for being here today with us to share your insights on the satellite industry and what's happening with mobile connectivity. I also want to take a moment to thank the Mobile Satellite Users Association for hosting these sessions. If you'd like to learn more about the MSUA, please visit msua.org. And you can learn all about our weekly newsletter that gives you all of the latest in satellite news and technologies, as well as all about our upcoming awards program and so much more. So be sure to visit msua.org. And again, thanks so much for being here today, Andy.
Thanks very much, Lisa. I appreciate the opportunity.
We'll see y'all next time on MSUA's Game Changers Live.